back on this, and in the event that we need to continue to get that Title I money and the Title VI money flowing to the districts?
So the answer to that is the waiver application requires that we support the state adopted standards. Unless we have a different set of state adopted standards, we can't move forward, period. So if we could have come up with a plan B, we would have come up with a plan B, but there was no way to do so.
So every line item of federal funds that are flowed through the department are affected because Common Core standards are universally part of the department's mission?
Because they are the state adopted standards. If we had adopted a different set of standards, it would be a different question, but these are currently the state adopted standards.
So was there a conversation about adopting another set of standards in that 4-month period?
That's why I was starting with the State Board of Education adopt standards versus the Michigan Department of Education. So the State Board of Education may have discussed this, or they didn't consider it at their public meetings, but you've seen their statements on that they are reaffirming their commitment to the Common Core state standards. So we had discussions about if they did adopt new standards, what could we do, but we did not have conversations about how do we, the Department of Education, adopt different standards, because that is not our authority.
I think, Senator, should the State Board of Education direct us that they would like us to follow a different path, the issue is not a 4-month process. It's at least a 4-year process to put all of this in place. And so first we would have to go out and develop common standards that we would all agree to in Michigan, and that's a 1-year process, including all kinds of reviews. And then the assessments aligned to that set of standards would have to be developed. So it's about a 4-year process. 1 year just to get the standards in place, and then get them approved by others so that we could utilize them for the processes of federal funding.
So I guess in terms of your question about a plan B, we did discuss how we would go about different things if we had to get to new standards, if the state board requested it, or if different things happened. But you are at some level looking at the plan B, is we have to live with the adopted standards and no money to implement them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Senator Colbeck. And then
Thank you very much. I was listening to the previous testimony, and I was being told that there's no federal control over these standards, and there's no federal control over our government. Now I'm over the adoption of these standards, and now I'm hearing that, well, one of the things we need to do is change our standards so that we can get this federal money and comply with federal guidelines. And so it seems to me that we are changing our behavior based on what the federal government is dictating. Is that not a fair assessment?
I think there needs to be a distinction made between the standards and the expectation that the state would have a set of standards around which it would take action. We have currently a set of standards that have been adopted, known as the Common Core State Standards. If we were to have adopted a different set of standards, so it's the undergirding of that. It is not that the federal government is telling us which set of standards to adopt. It is telling us that we must have a set of standards.
Right.
And so
but
that's
if we would
where
not
we get
have adopted those standards, we wouldn't have access to the money that was supposed to be out there for
we would have had to have another set of standards that had been adopted.
Right. Let me add on
career
what
and college
Linda
ready.
said. Under No Child Left Behind, all states were required to adopt standards, which Michigan did, as did every other state in the nation. Under the ESEA flexibility program, states were required to adopt college and career ready standards. And there were two options, Common Core, or develop your own standards and get them vetted as career and college ready by a board of higher education authorities.
Okay.
Because at the time of the waiver, 2011, Michigan had adopted Common Core in 2010. Clearly, Common Core was not only our adopted standards, but the more efficient route for Michigan. Okay. So now we're in year 2 of the waiver, 2013-14. We had choices along the way, but we made choices to adopt Common Core and then to use that to get our waiver. Okay. So now our waiver is jeopardized because it is dependent on Common Core, but we would not have had to adopt Common Core. But it is true that the federal funds that flow into Michigan under the current ESEA, No Child Left Behind, forget waivers for a minute, are contingent upon state-adopted standards.
Okay.
That is a true statement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. See any other questions? Call them up. Next, wishing to speak and opposed to the Common Core standards is Ganina Gaza London. Thank you, and Welcome to the committee, and when you're comfortable, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Janina, but close enough. I've never done this before. I'm very new. But however, I do have to speak up. I'm a physician. I'm an obstetrician. In my everyday practice, I base everything I do on research and research-based outcomes. There is no way I could practice in any other way, otherwise I'm endangering my patients' lives. I have to see significant differences that will guide what I do. I'm a mother of 4, 3 in school, 1 on the way, 2 elementary, 1 in middle school, and I'm very concerned with continuing implementation of Common Core. At the end of the previous speakers, I've listed a number of major concerns, but I guess I don't understand, and it's a rhetorical question, how the Board of Education in a state can unilaterally just adopt something this major without having it discussed, asked of parents, asked of the legislature. And I'm new to politics, and I'm becoming more involved because it was a blind sight, and it's not acceptable to me, as to many other parents. Next, I feel like the state and local governments have lost control of our children's education. These national standards, they are federally funded and privately funded. They're owned by a company that's private, Achieve Inc. They're copyrighted. They cannot be changed. So if I as a parent do not agree with what is taught in my children's school or how they teach math or English or literature, why literature, 50% of it is supposed to be based on pick up skip T.S. Eliot and Shakespeare and pick up a menu, make sure you know how to read it properly and interpret it. What am I going to do? Where do I go to ask them to change it? I can't. I can't go to the teacher because she has standards. I can't go to the principal. I can't go to the superintendent. It's a copyrighted document. I can't go to you, to the legislators. Our hands are tied. I can't even go to the governor who signed it. So I'm finding a major problem with this. As I have researched more into Common Core, you're not allowed to omit any part of it. You can't alter it locally. You may add 15% of the same content to improve it or make it a little more embellished, more fun, change your style of teaching the way I understood how it is. So again, we lost control. My next point, the experts that were there in English, literature, and math on the validation board of Common Core, there were a couple of them that voted against it. They testified in the House hearings in September. One, the gentleman that was the expert for math, he said by the time you get to 8th grade, you're a year or 2 behind our current standards in Michigan. That's unacceptable. In English and the literature, the expert, I believe she came from Maryland, a great educational state. She said by the time the children are ready and graduated, they're ready for community college. Well, how about university? We should have higher standards. We have current higher standards, in my opinion, and apparently in hers. And she writes books on education. So we don't listen. My next point of contention is that this Common Core standards has slowly been implemented into the school system since it was passed without us knowing. So why is it such a covert operation? I mean, if it's such a great educational tool, why was it not available to show everybody math Common Core standards were not even done in 2010 when they rammed it through? So how are you going to look and see? You just blindly accepted something that didn't even exist. If I practice like this on a daily basis, I'm going to kill my patients. My next issue, it has never been tested long term. The only outcomes data that I could find was in New York, and that was the only piloted state that I could see any results on. So you asked the question. Last spring, after 1 year of implementation, 75% of the students that took the standardized test failed. So the commentary on that assessment was, well, you can blame the test. It's too hard for the students. Okay? You can blame the teachers because they weren't quite ready to teach Common Core after 2 years. Okay, a year and a half of being taught how to teach. Or you can blame Common Core. We don't have a conclusion. My next issue is, why are we changing Michigan's standards? I think I heard somebody say that we had 1 year of a prior Michigan standard for education that then was, boom, kicked aside when Common Core came in. We never even gave it a chance. So I moved back to Michigan after I served in the military. Did I do something wrong? Should I have stayed somewhere else? Is the state of Michigan Education Department incapable of developing and improving our children's education? Apparently the city of Brighton is doing just fine. They have very good public schools. As a researcher, I start with a hypothesis. I plan an experiment, and then I perform the experiment. Then I look at my data and I analyze it, and then I make a conclusion. Right now, Common Core in the state is experimenting on our children, and we have absolutely no outcome data except one failed New York experiment. What international data? From whom? Was it the same Common Core? We have to compare apples and apples, not apples and oranges. I grew up in Europe. I've seen the education there. I know what to expect of my children. They're doing fine on what they did before. But suddenly we have to reinvent the wheel because there's federal and private money attached to it. That's not fair to us. So in conclusion, I, as a physician, an obstetrician, I would never recommend that a pregnant woman use a particular medication during pregnancy if I did not have at least some reassuring human data to support safety use in pregnancy. Common Core is an experiment on our children. In the process, we have lost our constitutional state right to mold our children's education as we here see fit. So I am completely against it. Feel free to call me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I guess there is a question if you'd be willing to take a question. Senator Kobach.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your testimony. By the way, you're the only person, and I've been asking this for months, that's been able to actually provide any data that actually draws conclusions around the outcomes. And I have seen the New York study, and you're right, it's inconclusive. And we're talking about hitting the reset button on our education system based on an inconclusive study. So I think the analogy to your job as an obstetrician is very well put, and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Let me call her up. Next person on the list is Eileen Weiser, and she is here to testify in support of the bill. Yeah. Is Eileen here? Yeah. And in the interest of full disclosure, Eileen is also a member of the State Board of Education. Welcome to the committee, and we appreciate your testimony.
And before Eileen gets started, I'm going to read a couple more cards because we have a big pile of them. Dave Sipka, supporting the bill but not wishing to speak from the Muskegon area. And then we have Kevin Kornaska, not wishing to speak, supports the bill. Karen McPhee, not wishing to speak, supports the bill. And Lindsay Case, not wishing to speak, supports the bill. Welcome.
Thank you. I am a member of the State Board of Education, and I respectfully ask the Senate and these joint committees to support the Common Core State Standard House resolution. As you know, the hearings this summer that Representative Kelly chaired were exhaustive and comprehensive. And I recognize from listening to questions today that many of your questions were addressed this summer in those hearings. And I would suggest that we find a way to make available to you Bill Schmidt of MSU's testimony. Bill was the person who organized the Trends in International Math and Science study, which he did because he was curious why children in other countries loved math and did it well as adults, and why our U.S. students were not comfortable with it and didn't learn it well. And as Bill said at the time, the way that we taught math by topics prior to Common Core was similar to asking children to memorize the phone book. that other countries' approaches a series of topics that build one upon another and provide a solid and comfortable a base of information in math. And also, I would ask that you listen to, or that we can make available to you, Checker Finn's testimony from the Fordham Foundation on the comparative quality of Michigan standards before their adoption in 2010. The House resolution allows Michigan schools to continue their work improving their instructional practice using the Common Core state standards. It clearly identifies what the Common Core is and what it isn't, and what it does not do, and that includes that local control remains the same as before Michigan's 2010 adoption, as in Michigan statute. The House resolution reasonably requires a comparison of the Common Core state standard assessment vehicles for their cost and their ability to provide useful information to parents, schools, teachers, students, and the public on student achievement. It also provides a vehicle for the Department and the State Board of Education to work with the legislature in the future to make sure that new K-12 standards are considered by the Department and the Board and also reviewed by the legislature, which has the responsibility of providing funds for assessments and other work. We respectfully request the House to review the House testimony as I suggested, and we should make that available to you. I'll make sure it is. We also ask that the Senate approve the House resolution, which would allow schools to proceed and the Department to develop its analysis of the assessment vehicles, which are right now deadline is December 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. Are there any questions? Senator Colbeck.
And thank you very much for the reference out to the House testimony in regards to the outcomes. And I think we've discussed this before. As far as validation of the difference in outcomes associated with the adoption of Common Core, from what I understand, the two studies that you referenced there are kind of book audits. They're actually going off and just doing some comparisons between the standards and seeing what's happening in those other countries versus, and just, you know, assuming that we've got the performance associated with those countries and kind of correlating that to the actual standards. From when I was doing audits, and I do a lot of ISO 9000 or SAS 70 audits, whatever, it's the equivalent of just comparing a lot of the raw paperwork and comparing the standards back and forth to one another, not necessarily correlated to saying, here's the standard, here's the performance in accordance with that specific standard. How are we doing better under that new standard or not? And so I guess I just respectfully, you know, with regards to the House testimony and those reports, there's kind of a difference between a book audit and a field audit in regards to the level of certainty or validation that this is actually going to help overall student performance. So I understand it, you know, going off and looking at it and saying, hey, we think that this is going to raise the bar in one particular subject area, but overall, I want to see a test that says, you know, that's why the New York study for me is more compelling. I want to see something that goes side by side and says, my kids are learning better under this new standard than they were before, and I haven't seen any evidence that demonstrates that today. Am I missing something with that assessment?
I hate to say it, but I believe that you are.
Okay.
The Trends in International Math and Science study was not a setup for the Common Core. However, the information that Bill and the other researchers developed in 1995 resulted in, as Bill says, being an instant celebrity worldwide and having to testify in far more Senate hearings than he possibly could imagine. And the other unusual benefit, which he didn't anticipate, was being called by almost every Republican governor in office saying, how can we change the way that our states are instructing children so that children can learn the way that they do in other countries? It was an exhaustive analytical and statistical analysis. What happened then in 1997 is that Professor Schmidt took the time and was funded to write what became the framework for the Common Core state standards in math. And Senator Colbeck, I'm remiss because this summer I saw a very good email from you talking about the quality of teachers and the specificity of the standards. And while I had a response to it, I gave it to the House and I didn't give it to you. Okay. And I deeply regret this. For those of us, there's only 2 Republicans on the State Board of Education, and we were spread pretty thinly this summer on trying to, all the board members were addressing things, but sometimes one party listens better to its members than the other party listens better to theirs. So The example that I can give you, which I'm hoping will be helpful, but we have a son that I believe you've met who's in 7th grade. And Danny never learned his math facts. He was in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, and they have a spiral curriculum, different ways, or everyday math. And I remember in kindergarten being told at the parent conference that it would be our responsibility to teach our children their math facts, that couldn't happen because everyday math had them teaching pre-algebra starting in kindergarten, and so they were just going to let that go. Well, he never learned them, and we're paying a price for it now. We worked long and hard at home, but nothing that was going on in school consistently addressed learning math facts. The Common Core state standards for 3rd grade math say specifically that a child must know his addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division math facts 0 to 10 by the end of 3rd grade. Now, it doesn't say that every child has to be laid out on a rack and tortured until they know it. The reason it says that, though, is because if a child doesn't know their math facts, there needs to be a reason that is then addressed through how the child is educated. Every child has roughly a 2-year up and down period. If you're 2 years ahead of yourself in 4th grade, you should be in 6th. If you're 2 years behind, then maybe you should be in 2nd or 3rd. You should be worked on. So at this point, if you take this as an example, because the Center for Teacher Quality Standards, I got that wrong, but they've been saying for about 8 years now that only about 13% of the teachers, elementary school teachers in the United States, have had the appropriate coursework to be able to teach elementary school math well, which means your child has roughly a 1 in 6 chance each year of getting someone who really understands math and believes in it. So going back to this hypothetical child who's not learned their math facts, the teacher needs to help identify with the school whether the child has a developmental delay, whether there's a learning disability. They need to be evaluated for whether or not they have command of the classroom, whether the curriculum is working for the majority of the students in the school, and whether or not everything that's going on is conducive for every child and that one, and if not, how it's going to be addressed. So the specificity, when people talk to you about the specificity, the standards, it's because in tracking all this back to other countries, who have addressed math well, we see that that's how they teach it. They make sure that kids have these building blocks in place before they move them along. It doesn't dictate curriculum. It only sets up standards so that each child has a chance to have their learning style addressed and to make progress that will lead them to a successful life.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just a quick follow-up, and it gets into, there's a lot of discussion over the how in that response, and we have a lot of discussions over what versus how in these standards. Is it focused on the what or the how? And I agree with you that all this comes down to how do you teach the kid? You want to make sure you have the best teachers that have been trained in the best methods to adapt and be flexible to map the best teaching methods to an individual kid. But my concern is, what I've heard shared from a lot of people, is that these standards go beyond the what into the how, and it.
No. But they don't. But you can see why when you hear that example. Yeah. Why, if you believe that all teachers in K-12 are well prepared, that all schools understand each child. You know, in other words, if you walk into this, not just believing in our school system, I believe in our school systems, but I also understand that there are things that are strengths and weaknesses. This has the potential to allow schools to address their weaknesses. We aren't driving that. We're just simply saying that's how it's done in places that work. We can't force schools to adapt to anything except to say there will be an assessment, and if you teach this well, the child will do well on the assessment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Popgeorge.
Ms. Weiser, thank you for your testimony. I'm glad you're here. You kind of touched on what I think we have a problem doing here, and that's teacher evaluation, because you can put whatever you want up at the standard level. If you do not have a way of measuring individual student progress, you do not have a base for all this other stuff, in my view. Now, do we measure individual student progress in Michigan? Some schools do, but the answer is no. We have things like the MEP test, which is given once a year, and you have to wait 5 months for the results. Yet out there is a thing called computer adaptive testing that Grand Rapids uses. I know there are charter schools that use it, public schools. And that's 2 tests, one in September and one in May. And what happens is the kid sits down and he starts answering questions. And if he's getting them all right, the questions get harder. Then as soon as he or she misses one, they get easier. I'm actually talking past you, as you know. Now, the results are there the next day. In fact, really, if you're in a hurry, you can get them the next minute. And the results go to the parent, to the kid, to the teacher, and then there's an aggregate for the class. And if a whole bunch of kids miss the same question, then the teacher says, hey, wait, I better do something. Now, under that system, it doesn't matter whether you're in a school where the kids are having trouble or it's the best school in Michigan. What you're measuring is how well each kid progressed, and that's on the teacher to a large extent. Now, we're not doing that. And the reason we have not adapted computer-assisted testing in Michigan is because the Board of Education is what all those folks that come before us are hiding behind, saying, we're not ready for that. To which I have said, okay, if you're not smart enough to put out an RFP to get all those people that do this come in and bid for a contract, put out an RFQ or an RFI, and then they'll tell us what they do, and we'll be smarter, and we can put out an RFP. But if we do not, from the very beginning, understand we must measure individual student progress, or else the whole thing just falls apart. Again, the MEP test. You can have your head in the furnace, your feet in the refrigerator, and on average, the temperature's okay. That's what the MEP test does. Why do we keep doing that? Is the thing that frustrates me beyond belief, that we haven't gone to the very core of this issue, which is individual student progress. And here we're going to have this big discussion about standards. Nobody's going to come up with terrible standards. Everybody's going to say exactly what you did and what they need in the 3rd grade. So in many ways, that's almost immaterial, and we're focusing on the wrong end of this pyramid, in my view. And I thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk all the folks out there.
Well, Senator Papageorge, you just stole my thunder on the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, because I don't know how much information has been well conveyed to you, but it is a computer adaptive assessment. And that means that every child gets a different assessment. It means that there's actionable information going back to the classrooms. It's telling, I think, that the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers have endorsed the Common Core state standards but have not endorsed the assessments. They feel it's too much actionable information coming to teachers who may not be prepared to use it. And I don't want to paraphrase them. Diane Ravitch's blog is pretty explicit on this, but the worry is that that teachers won't be able to use the information well, even though it's very clear, and that there will be issues with that. And I know that they should be addressing this directly with us and with you, because we'll be producing a report comparing SPAC, if you go forward with the House resolution, you'll be comparing different assessments that are what I would call bits and pieces assessments that are less information, possibly more frequently. But the answer to how to really inform parents and the public and schools and help teachers become better instructors is computer adaptive assessment. Michigan is very fortunate. We joined the SBAC consortium early enough that Joseph Martineau, who testified here today, Dr. Martineau was a member of the governing association, and he made sure that the assessment would meet Michigan's needs for the future for our students.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Eileen. And
Thank you.
also, a thought occurred to me while you were testifying earlier, and that was basically an analogy or a metaphor with regards to this. And what you were discussing made me think that the standards are basically a bar to get over, not necessarily the highest thing that they have to get over, maybe the lowest bar that they have to get over. And it's up to the school districts to decide whether they want to pole vault over it or they want to use a ladder to get over it or some other way. Is that describe the situation, I guess, in more common, I guess, lay language?
Senator Walker, I would agree with that. I would also, if you'll allow me one more quick anecdote, I'll make this one small. I remember that when No Child Left Behind came out, one of our teachers of the year talked about being the chair of a math department that was completely apoplectic about the teaching to the test, the new concept with No Child Left Behind. And he asked them to put together the 10 most important concepts in high school math for each of the classes that were taught at that school. They did it in a week, and they had about 70-80% concurrence. They hammered out what they thought were the 10 most important ideas. And then he asked them to spend 3 weeks determining how many of them they had taught in their classes that year, because it was May. And the answer came back about 60%. And he said, I defy you. He said, there were all kinds of good reasons as to why they'd never covered 40% of the curriculum that was necessary to move on from Algebra 1 to 2. But I ask you how a child who's not exposed to all of the concepts of Algebra 1 can pass Algebra 2. They just won't be prepared. So with all of this, schools can choose what they want to do. They can choose to not fully implement any set of standards. We hope they will. We hope that they will find ways to help their teachers become as good at their craft as they possibly can be. But the goal with any set of standards is to teach it any way you want, as long as you teach them well. And you can go beyond it. You can teach it. We have magnet schools in Detroit who teach things in Japanese, who are teaching our curricula, their curricula, our standards in Japanese to children because they speak Japanese. Bravo. The question is, how can we move Michigan children along so that they can function in the society that they're going to be working in? Right now, today's kindergartners are going to be at current trends, finishing work in 2073. So we're preparing them for a work span that is boggling to me. I can't imagine. I've watched iPads in the last 4 years take over children's lives. Next year's kindergartners are going to be the first year that we will have kids who've been swiping iPads their entire lives. And as you look at how we want to make them learners and people who can live a full civic and economic life, family lives, and be part of their community over those years, to me, the Common Core state standards and the Smarter Balanced Assessment are the answers to set the framework for our schools to help our students and our families to support their children to learn and do this. It could fail. Anything can fail. We certainly know the results of our current standards in the meat. But this is a step in the right direction, and I hope that we can take it together. And I recognize that there are important questions that must be answered, and I welcome them. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
All right, next I'm going to call on Jane Wilson. She's a retired teacher, Constitutional Conservatives for America. She's from Marshall, wishing to speak and opposes the bill. You're asking for 20 minutes. That can't happen today. We have a big stack of cards. Is Jane still here? Jane, if you could come up and try to reduce it down to just a few minutes. And as you're coming up, I want to read some other cards that have been turned in support of the bill. Not wishing to speak is Bob Kefchin, Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. Brad Bilodeau supports, not wishing to speak, Michigan Association of School Administrators. Donna Aberlich from Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, not wishing to speak, supports the Common Core state standards and has submitted written testimony. And KP Pellerin, Mission Readiness, supports the Common Core state standards and also has submitted written testimony. Jane, welcome.
Yes. You've no doubt received a letter in the mail from me this past week. I mailed it to you on Saturday. Should have gotten it yesterday, I think. I'm from Marshall, Michigan. I'm a retired teacher. Common Core represents education without representation. Child psychologist Dr. Megan Koshnick criticizes Common Core standards for K through third grade as age inappropriate developmentally. Over 500 early childhood health and education professionals share her concerns and feel that Common Core standards are actually harmful to children. These early childhood health and education professionals signed a statement saying, in part, the proposed standards conflict with compelling new research in cognitive science, neuroscience, child development, and early childhood education about how young children learn, what they need to learn, and how best to teach them in kindergarten and the early grades. Edward Miller and Nancy Carlson Page quoted Dr. Carla Horowitz of the Yale Child Study Center as stating, the Common Core standards will cause suffering, not learning for many, many children. Dr. Koshnick gave a presentation at an education conference September 9th at the University of Notre Dame, which can be viewed, and I sent this to you via email. You can view it on YouTube. Why do we care if Common Core standards are age appropriate? Well, you can answer that with one word, stress, says Dr. Koshnick. Instead of thinking about what's developmentally appropriate for kindergartners, they are thinking college is where we want the kindergartner to end up. So let's track back down to kindergarten and have kindergartners work on these skills from an early age. This can cause stress for the child because they are not prepared for this level of education. Common Core math expects kindergarten children to think in the abstract, for instance, when in reality their brains are not yet developed to think this way. They need to be doing concrete operations at this stage of development, explains Dr. Koshnick. Dr. Coleman, known as the lead architect of Common Core, has never taught a day in his life, and it shows. I want to share two personal examples that I got after I sent this, the day after I sent it to my sister in Maine, who is a retired teacher, and to my daughter-in-law, who teaches first grade. My daughter-in-law said, quote, "This is exactly what I'm experiencing in first grade. Common Core wants my students to think at a level they are not ready for." And my sister in Maine wrote, she had just been to her chiropractor last week, and she said he told her that his third grade daughter cries for 2 hours the night before each school day when she knows that math will be taught because she doesn't understand it. He met with his daughter's teacher, telling her he did not understand the math homework either. And the teacher told him she's trying to teach the children abstract thinking. Parents are not involved. Parents want to be involved, but in Common Core, they don't want parents involved in their children's education. And in fact, Michael Cohen of Achieve Incorporated, which has been referred to, admitted in his public testimony this summer that parents are not part of the equation. Senators, education always works best when the parents can work together with the school, with the teachers, and with their children. Who has a better, greater invested interest than the parents? Common Core has not been field tested, never been sent to childhood health and education professionals to review and advise, and children are suffering because of it. how many other young children across America are suffering from Common Core as well? Only God knows. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks for your abbreviated testimony. Really appreciate it. And to members, Jane also submitted written testimony. Next, I want to call Chuck Fellows, wishing to speak, supports Common Core state standards and smarter balance assessment. Chuck is from South Lyon, and as Chuck is coming up, I want to read in some cards. Don Ohlendorf, ESA Legislative Group, not wishing to speak but supports the bill. KP Pellerin, American Edge, not wishing to speak, supports Common Core, and as she's given us some written testimony as well. Chuck, welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the Common Core and Smarter Balance Assessment. I am certain your staffs are tired of my emails, so I won't go over all that material. But I'm here today. I've attended almost all of the hearings on the Common Core. I'm a regular attendee at the Education Committee meetings when I can make it. I am a retired manufacturing manager, over 40 years of experience. When I retired, I got the opportunity to stand in a teacher's shoes in an alternative high school for approximately 5 years. I have looked at the Common Core. I have taken the Smarter Balance Assessment pilot tests. I have reviewed educational material from around the globe. One of the most interesting and the most recent is Amanda Ripley's The Smartest Kids in the World and How They Got There. You might like to read it because it gives you the perspective that has been missing from this dialogue all along. And it's the dialogue or the words of the student. We listen to the adults in the game. We listen to the professionals. We listen to the experts. But there are only two real experts in this game of education. One is the teacher, and the other is the student. One of the things I liked about the Common Core is the Common Core, according to Randy Weingart, 70% of the teachers in her organization had an opportunity to take a look at the Common Core. I, as a parent and an ordinary lay person, had an opportunity to make a contribution to the Common Core. In the spirit of full disclosure, I'm the president of the board of directors of Flex Tech High School. We're a small charter high school in Brighton, Michigan. We are Common Core. We are Smarter Balance Assessment. Most recently, our students participated in something called Farm to Table in Brighton, Michigan. It was a community initiative sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce and other businesses. The culinary arts students received comments for their participation because they prepared some of the food, they served some of the food, and they cleaned up after everybody ate, 200 people. And their comments were fabulous. They never give up. Outstanding. Those are unsolicited comments from people that participated and people that organized. The fundamental difference, as I see it in my experience, Senator Colebrook, thank you for reminding me. I'm somewhat of a standards expert, being a lead auditor, certified lead auditor for the ISO 9000 standard. And a small correction, it's not about comparing a standard to what people do. It's about using a standard to improve the process for incremental continual improvement. But what Common Core does, it allows the teacher and the student to take the lead. It's not legislators, who work very hard, by the way, creating policy. It's not the Michigan Department of Education, which, like any agency, promulgates the rules. And it's not the local administrators that evaluate. It's the teachers and the students. They are the important people. I ask you to give, based on my 40 years of business experience, my experience standing in a teacher's shoes, being the father of 2 adopted children who are both special needs, studying education, practice, and policy around the world, I urge you to move forward with the implementation, the funding of the implementation of the Common Core, and the Smarter Balance Assessment. As Senator Papageorge has said, and Representative Rogers has asked me many, many times, how do we know the individual student is making progress? I have a little experiment for all of you that are familiar with iPads. Go to khanacademy.org. Take a look at the math there. I have watched a math teacher take 35 students in one classroom, coming from all different backgrounds and all different contexts. And because of the ability of computer-aided technology to provide instant feedback, she is able to track the progress in real time for every student in that classroom. Again, the key people, the teacher and the student, I ask you to give them an opportunity to demonstrate to you that the Common Core and the Smarter Balance Assessments are the way we need to go. Like Pasi Sahlberg told us, don't copy us, learn from us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate your testimony today and your passion and all the emails that you've sent. Any questions for Chuck? I see none. I want to, well, thank you very much. Also want to recognize a couple of state reps who came over today. Representative Tim Kelly is here, and Representative Tom McMillan. If there's somebody else I missed, I'm sorry I haven't seen you come in. Thank you for coming and participating. Next up is Rebecca Rojo. No, she doesn't wish to speak. I'm sorry. Let's move on to Scott Jenkins, wishing to speak, supports the bill. Oh, he's not here right now. William Fido opposes the bill. Would like to speak for 5 minutes, but we can give you a couple. We still have a pretty big stack, and we want to make sure we are respectful of all the other folks that have shown up today. And as you're coming up, Kathleen Mary turned in a card, not wishing to speak, supports the bill, and she's with Wayne Risa. Harrison Blackman supports the bill, not wishing to speak. He represents Democrats for Education Reform. Dave Randalls supports the bill from Oakland Schools. Don Ohlendorf, again, ESA Legislative Group, supports the bill, not wishing to speak. William, your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I am a retired teacher, and I've taught at all at grade levels, special education, and emotionally impaired kids, as well as other types of disabilities. And I want to say, first of all, I'm not against planning and instituting a comprehensive curriculum for K-12 students in the state of Michigan. Not against having a curriculum determined. I would expect such a curriculum to allow for teacher creativity, teacher experience, and teacher enhancement, as well as goals established by a local district. I would also expect this curriculum to be established by and studied by our own Department of Education, with input from districts, teachers, and parents of our Michigan students, not Washington, D.C., or others. The principle of a core curriculum started nearly 20 years ago with E.D. Hirsch and his books, What Every First Grader and Second Grader Need to Know, etc. You've probably seen these in the bookstores. They were a result of lengthy national research out of the University of Virginia. Hundreds of public school and college educators, textbook writers, and parents. His results were designed to help students become familiar with their culture in order to understand well what they read. They were a supplement to the local curriculum or at home, and were not intended to be a national mandate or a state mandate. This has changed with Common Core. Diane Ravitch, an author of history texts and an early collaborator of Hirsch, has also published her opposition to Common Core for many of the reasons I am sharing with you today. The federal government should have nothing to say about how Michigan citizens organize and administer their schools, much less their curriculum. I'm basing this on the 10th Amendment, which specifies that powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states or to the people. These include, among other powers, licensing of insurance, medicine and doctors, highway regulations, and education. The President, Congress, state legislators, armed servicemen, policemen, and many other government officials have sworn to uphold our Constitution, and so has one other major group, teachers. We have seen the federal government take over more and more of the state's powers in all of the above and many other areas. It's the money, Our schools will do practically anything for a little more money, and it's this carrot of money which convinces us to allow the tentacles of national government to grasp us and control us. It's not about education, it's about control. Please consider carefully how well the federal government improves, and I put that in quotes, everything else it controls. The Common Core standards have been described by critics as being standards which are substandard, curricula which are untested and with no method for continuous improvement having been set forth. Now, I heard today that there are methods for continuous improvement, but I've not seen that. The bottom line is that these Common Core standards cannot improve the performance of our children in school. Good teachers, time on task, well-developed classroom materials, proven teaching methods, and input from parents are much more the key. We have to improve education where the rubber meets the road. What is in the Common Core curriculum is a good thing. If it is a good thing, let us prove it before adopting it of our own free will. And could we get out of it of our own free will? Have not heard that. And let us not be fooled into adopting it in order to obtain money. We need first to see proof of its effectiveness and to assure local understanding of its content, which I am seeing is not there. It would be better than passing a law so we can find out what's in it. And let us keep our educational standards to be set and administered by our Michigan educators and officials. I think we should do this with people from Michigan, or at least people we hired to do it for us. And that is my point of view.
Well, and we appreciate you sharing it with the committee today. Okay. Seeing no questions, thank you. Okay. Troy Vanderleen, Kentwood Public Schools, supports the bill, would like to speak. And as Troy is coming up, Joan Johnson turned in a support. I oppose Common Core, Smarter Balanced Testing in the database. Allie Bush from the Grand Rapids Chamber supports the bill. Michael Bolas supports the bill, not wishing to speak, from the President's Council on State Universities. And Aaron Shore, Michigan Community College Association, supports the bill. And Joan Gauthier, Allegan Area Educational Service Agency, supports Common Core. Not wishing to speak, but says needs 5 minutes. So, welcome.
Welcome. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Troy Vanderlaan, and I teach at Kentwood Public Schools, just south of Grand Rapids. I teach at high school there. I want to thank you for your service for a great state. I really do appreciate it. All of you worked very hard to get here, and thank you for your time. It was very funny. This morning, I told my students that I will be testifying in front of the Senate, the Joint Committee, and they thought that was pretty cool. And then a few said, "Hey, Mr. V, since we have Senate and the 17th Amendment in our test this Friday, could you ask the senators if we can just get rid of those and we still get points for them?" And I said, I will definitely ask them that. So you can let me know what you think about that one. But to bring it back to what I do in the classroom, Kentwood is a very diverse school district. We have over 60% free and reduced lunch. We have over 60 different nations represented there and over 60 different spoken languages. And I love that. I'm a proud teacher at Kentwood, and I'm proud to be a Falcon. What Common Core has been doing for me the past 2 years, and I've been using it to enhance my content over the past 2 years, but what it allows me to do is it allows all of my students, whether they're learning the English language or whether they're prepping for AP courses, getting ready to go to college, or getting ready to go to the tech center to become a skilled tradesman or a skilled tradeswoman, it gives them a set of relevant applications to put forth skills needed to solve problems. And basically what my job is to make sure that I get competent citizens through my class and develop a structure for learning, lifelong learning with my students. Common Core standards supplements what I'm already using with a very, very strong approach on analyzing content, reading for information, critical thinking, information synthesis, which means, for example, to take different pieces of information and put them together into one essay or one problem-solving technique. These are skills that can be attributed to any job, whether we are looking at doctors and lawyers, senators, carpenters, electricians, teachers, plumbers. These are skills and standards that allow my students to develop a very strong foundation in the skills that we need to be very competitive in the global market today. So I need to develop students that can compete locally, state, and of course across the globe. And what I'm asking for is if we can please continue or establish a funding to help out teachers across the state use the Common Core and apply it to a test, whether it's a standardized test, wherever it comes from, I don't know, that's not my expertise. But if we can have some model to use to gauge our kids on these very important skills. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Troy. And Senator Colbeck has a question.
Sure. Hey, thank you very much. And I was intrigued because when you were describing some of the tools that you had available in context of Common Core, from my experience, when I've done my investigations on this, there's a difference, obviously, between the objectives that are out there and actually how you apply it. Because you were focused very much on using it, talking about it as a supplement to what you're currently doing. And we were talking about, I don't know if you heard me say the standards bones connected to.
Sure.
Well, there's a lot of stuff underneath the waterline that may be good from a best practice perspective that you as a teacher should be able to pick from that bin of best practices and apply it to whatever the instruction is. But that's different than saying, here's the standard and here's the test associated with that, right? And I was wondering maybe if you could provide a little bit more distinction as to exactly what, the methods that you're using that you like inside of Common Core as opposed to the standards that using it as a standard as opposed to a method.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and thank you for that. Let me give you an example. There's a lesson plan that my students have to act as muckrakers during the early part of the 1900s, and they're going to investigate a series of problems throughout America. And they have to then take primary and secondary sources through their investigation and compile them into an article to move the public on change. So that is a synthesis of information that is critical reading. It's also a dialogue because they work in partners, in pairs, and they're also using a very broad verbiage to construct this article, and there's key terms in it. The great thing about the Common Core is that the standards drive all of those models. And so I'm using my content, the same content I have been using, and curriculum, and then supplementing the Common Core standards in that lesson plan. What I would like, what would be great, is if we could have then some common assessment that we could use throughout the state to be able to test those skills. Am I doing my job in making sure that my students can synthesize information and they can use mathematics to build a model? I teach in a group, so we go a lot of cross-curricular. I work with the algebra teacher and the biology teacher. And so the nice thing about the Common Core, what we're using is it's enhancing those skills. It would just be great to see something that we could use across the state for a measurement system for us.
Okay. And if we were to adopt a Common Core as a standard, you could still apply those tools in the classroom. The issue is now are you going to get graded consistently for the application of those tools? Is that kind of a fair assessment?
And that's always there. And again, with the Common Core, there will be things that it's not a silver bullet. There's so much in education that is a factor. But since I've been teaching in the past 2 years, those standards are so far the best thing for my students to increase a very competitive edge and how to apply skills. That's the biggest thing we're talking about. How can we get our kids to apply skills and new skills? How can we get them to be problem solvers without having to open up a manuscript? Let's get them to lead the way. And that's what we're focusing on with these Common Core. And it would be great to have an assessment tool for that. Things that we miss, and it's going to be very challenging if we would assess our kids, but at least give us a gauge and a guidance system of, okay, where are we missing? What do we have to focus on? And we can do that as a state. We can unify together underneath that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate your testimony. Next up is Stephanie Hoffaker from representing homeschoolers, Emily City, wishing to speak opposed to the Common Core. And as Stephanie is coming up, I want to say that Jennifer Smith turned in a card in support of Common Core, Michigan Association of School Boards. Julie Rowe, AFT Michigan, supports the bill. Gary Nayert, Great Lakes Education Project, supports the bill. And Emily Laidlaw, Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, supports the bill. Stephanie, welcome.
Good afternoon, Senators. I apologize ahead of time for my scratchy voice. I've been fighting a cold, and I'm a little bit nervous. Maybe my coughing will wake up the crowd, though. Before addressing the issue at hand, I would like to thank you all for your service to this great state and the people who live here. I would particularly like to express my gratitude to you on behalf of all the homeschoolers in the state for your support of legislation that allows us to homeschool freely here. You may be unaware of this, excuse me, but Michigan is considered one of the best states in the union to homeschool in. Although Michigan is struggling to keep its residents due to the economic challenges here, there are many homeschoolers in one-income families that have chosen to stay here anyway because of the freedoms that they have to homeschool here. So again, I thank you. You may also be unaware that homeschoolers are paying close attention to this issue of Common Core, as they too could be affected by it. As a homeschooler for 18 years and a member and leader of several homeschool groups over those years, I would like to address you today regarding this issue. Excuse me. 6 weeks ago, North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest asked some questions of the North Carolina Department of Instruction regarding Common Core so that he would be better informed before a state Board of Education meeting. The Department of Instruction replied that they would be happy to meet his request if he would send them 10,000 pieces of blank paper so that they could answer him on. To my knowledge, he's still waiting. Unlike him, I do not have the time to read that much, to intelligently comment here on the comments or on the contents of Common Core. We've all heard the complaints that a huge focus is on nonfiction informational text, that algebra is not introduced until 9th grade instead of 8th, that times tables up through 15 are not introduced until later, and that there is no instruction for cursive writing, and that the fine arts will be ignored because they won't be tested on them. Maybe they're incorrect. I don't know. Hopefully someone else can comment on those specifics today. But rather, I would like to address the process which has brought us here. No one will disagree that many of our state's children are struggling in school. I agree that on the surface, having a Common Core of standards sounds good. However, this process of securing free government prize money to help our schools seems suspect. The application process for Phase 1 of Race to the Top funding lasted only 2 months, from November 2009 to January 2010. Of the 500 possible points each state can earn on the application, 70 were given if the state signed on to adopting common standards. Excuse me. However, these standards were not even finished being written until June of 2010. So in essence, 45 states signed on to common standards sight unseen, Michigan, unfortunately, being one of them. Thankfully, almost half of those states have since postponed implementation, again, Michigan being one of them. Excuse me. On that same application, 47 points were awarded if the state agreed to implement data retrieval systems to track our kids, data systems not yet fully explained. That 47 points plus the 70 equals 117 out of 50 possible, almost 25% of all the points you could earn to do just those two things. During Phase 1, Massachusetts earned the highest possible amount of points on the application for their already successful math and English programs, so they did not sign on to adopting different curriculum standards, thinking theirs were already very good. They placed 13th. That meant they didn't win any money. During Phase 2, the only thing they changed on their application was their willingness to adopt common standards. They moved up in ranking to number 1 and won $250 million. Interesting. As a note on the application, the state could only earn 10 points out of 500 for intervening in lowest achieving schools, which would seem to me to be of far more value and worth towards points for receiving funding for schools than data collection and new standards. I would like to quote from a Fox News article from August 8th of this year. Stanford professor James Milgram, the only mathematician on the Common Core Validation Committee, refused to sign off on the math standards, calling the whole thing in large measure a political document. During his testimony in May of 2011, he said, "I had considerable influence on the mathematics standards in the document. However, as is often the case, there was input from many other sources. A number of these sources were mainly focused on things like making the standards as non-challenging as possible, adding that it led to a number of extremely serious failings in the Common Core." My husband is a cardiologist up in the thumb, and he reminded me last night that there is no way the U.S. government would allow trained physicians to give medications to children without years and years of independent research, study, and analysis. He said, and I quote, "Why is the government so quick to allow our kids' minds to be used as guinea pigs with a set of standards and assessment never before used and created by politicians that know nothing of education?" In the last 3 days, I have spoken to a school teacher, a school board member, a principal, and a superintendent representing 2 different districts, and I asked them point blank to tell me one specific good thing about Common Core. I even asked Representative Kevin Daly last week. Not one of them could give me a single positive thing about it. The educators hemmed and hawed. One of them admitted, and I quote, "It feels like there is a train leaving the station and everyone is getting boarded on, but I don't know where it is going, and it makes me nervous." It is my contention that the state of Michigan, like so many other states, signed on again to something before understanding the details. Former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said of the Affordable Health Care Act that we have to pass the bill so that we can find out what's in it. We are now learning that it is anything but affordable. When the federal government is concerned, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Please, let us learn our lesson. Let us stop the implementation of Common Core here in Michigan while we can. We only agreed to accept nationally common standards in an effort to win prize money from the government. After 3 attempts, we have still not won any of these funds. Why are we then obligated to those standards? Common Core is just common politics. Our kids, however, are not common, and they deserve better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Thank you. That was her. Is Valerie Mills still here? Valerie, got you on the list next. Indicating with the National Council of Supervisors of Math. When you're comfortable, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
And I forgot to mention that you're here in support of Common Core.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Chairman Pavlov and Walker and members of the Joint Committee, thank you for having us here today and for listening to all of the, what can feel, I'm sure, from your point of view, like very conflicting points of view. I am a mathematics education consultant at Oakland Intermediate School District. I taught high school mathematics in Ypsilanti for almost 20 years, and I am currently, as you mentioned, President of the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics. As president, I work with mathematicians, mathematics education leaders across the country. Both my local work and my national office have required me to develop a fairly deep understanding of the Common Core state standards, and in particular, the many implications that these standards, I think, will have for teachers and schools and students. One of the most dramatic and perhaps unexpected and rarely referenced implications of the adoption of the Common Core state standards by Michigan and the some 44 other states in the Union is the way in which this shared set of educational goals has drawn teachers and university faculty members together into a rich array of collaborations to meet this common challenge. To illustrate this phenomenon, I want to share two stories of collaborations that I think suggest the degree to which the acceptance of these standards are enjoyed here in Michigan and across the country, and how continuing to participate in the collective use of these standards can be leveraged for Michigan's teachers and their students. The first story is that of an Oakland intermediate school pilot and review workshop series that we've run for the last 3 years in our county. In it, well over 500 teachers each year have been working together to develop K-12 Common Core aligned curriculum materials. During last year, in one of the sessions, one of the teachers in the 4th grade group raised a question about how students' understanding of measurement concepts is likely to develop during the elementary years. Well, until about 12 months ago, the answer to her question would have been found scattered across multiple studies and buried deep within research publications that most high school, elementary, and middle school teachers don't have access to. However, with the broad adoption of the Common Core, it's prompted working groups of university faculty to begin to synthesize research on topics into a number of free online resources. Each of these resources is organized around the Common Core standards. Accessing this research online, literally within a few moments, allowed this teacher and her colleagues to have multiple resources with relevant, well-vetted research to help them answer their questions. In this story, you hear about two important levels of collaboration that are already producing results. One is at the state level among teachers, and the other is nationally among academic faculty. Both have been enabled directly because of the Common Core state standards. The result of these collaborations is that teachers come away smarter about teaching and learning, and their students are the ultimate beneficiaries. My second story comes from a series of regular meetings with national groups that I attend as president of the council. Two are particularly relevant, I think, here. First is the Mathematics Common Core Coalition, or MC-Cubed, as the math group likes to call itself. It's a small group that includes only 8 members who are presidents of the 4 national mathematics associations in this country associated with education, and also representatives from the National Governors Association and the CCSSO, Chief State School Officers. The sole mission of this young organization is to ensure the successful implementation of the Common Core by coordinating the work of individual states and organizations and by identifying new resources and training needed to help teachers meet these new set of standards. Among the important early projects is a collaboration of 2 organizations to promote formative assessment, to get that individual daily student assessment information that you mentioned earlier, Papa George, nationally in preparation for higher expectations and more challenging assessments. The second is a slightly larger group. It's called the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences. The group is composed of the presidents of America's 16 national mathematics, education, and mathematics organizations. A roll call at a CBMS meeting would include the Venerable Mathematics Association of America, the American Statistical Association, the Society of Industrial and Applied Mathematicians, and others. The purpose of CBMS is to promote research, improve education, and expand the uses of mathematics. We also serve an advisory function, regularly consulting for the President, the Congress, and a host of national agencies. All but one of the member presidents signed an open letter in support of the Common Core standards, with one abstaining for lack of time. At the December meeting, we turned it over entirely to discussion about how each of the 16 organizations is working individually to provide support and resources for the Common Core. I've included the letter of support from this group with my testimony. In each of these settings, the energy and the enthusiasm focused on the supporting work of implementing the Common Core provides us with tangible evidence of the widespread belief of their efficacy. The stories also, I think, offer you dramatic examples of the not-so-visible ways in which the introduction of the Common Core has stimulated and mobilized educators in Michigan and across the country to work together in support of this set of standards. I believe that these collaborative efforts are likely to support greater student achievement. Already, the list of free and high-quality resources available for teachers is very impressive, and more are being released on a regular basis. As a lifelong member of Michigan's mathematics education community, I've seen no fewer than 5 new sets of standards here in Michigan. None of them were piloted in advance. Each time I was faced with the challenge of implementing these standards, making sense of the new content, locating new textbooks, allocating current resources, and adjusting my own teaching strategies with support from no further afield than my colleagues down the hall. This is shifting substantially. For the first time in 37 years, the Common Core state standards have sparked coordinated, thoughtful, curriculum-focused collaborations within the mathematics community, effectively one sustained conversation with the common goal of helping every child in our land learn mathematics, exactly the goal that our former Governor John Engler and other members of the National Governors Association had in mind in 2007. As a math teacher who personally understands what it means to face a classroom of students who struggle with mathematics, knowing that I need to raise every single one of their scores, I want to encourage you to join my colleagues and I in support of this opportunity to leverage the intellectual resources of a nation in support of our children here in Michigan. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate your testimony. Senator Caswell.
How many Common Core math standards are there?
How many Common Core math standards are there? I don't know the exact number. I know that an analysis done by the Department of Education and another one done nationally in which Dr. Schmidt was involved indicated there are about 30% fewer at every grade level, which is a very significant issue.
Why do we want the Common Core standards and give up our state standards?
Well, I think there are 2 reasons that I would say right off the bat. There are some significant, and I guess they all center around the fact that there are significant advantages in this particular set of standards.
What?
Pardon?
What?
What? You heard 2 of them referenced already. Dr. Gozen, at the very beginning of these hearings, mentioned the fact that these particular set of standards, instead of being designed by saying what goes into 5th grade and what goes into 6th grade, ask the question, how do mathematical ideas develop over time? And so trajectories were embedded into the standards that avoid the overlap that currently exists in Michigan standards, and I can give you some specific examples if you'd like. And in addition, take into account the research that we do have available on the development of these mathematics ideas for children. I think a second sort of space that I would point to when I think about the Common Core is the comments that I made pretty much in this paper, and that's that we are already beginning to leverage an enormous set of resources and good thinking by having a set of standards that are common not just in Michigan schools, but common across the country. It's amazing to me how very quickly folks have come together to build resources, to create a variety of opportunities to help teachers implement this set of standards. As I said earlier, being an experienced teacher in this state, I've seen 5 sets of standards. Never has there been the kind of conversation and development of resource materials to support a set of standards as we're seeing right now with only 2 years really behind us of an establishment of these standards. I expect to see significant additions to that regularly. We know that textbooks are being designed now to this particular set of standards. I'm sure if you are able to see Dr. Schmidt's testimony from the House, you'll see that one of the significant findings from the TIMSS International study, which, by the way, it's probably important for you guys to know, that study wasn't just one study. It was a set of studies. It's very interesting. It's a set of curriculum comparisons. So they literally said, what do we teach in the United States typically? And of course they had to do some fudging because we don't have one set of standards. They looked also at attitudes and beliefs of teachers and students. So for example, in Japan, students in Japan spend just about as much time doing homework as kids in this country do. And they spend, are you ready? Just as much time doing video games as kids do in this country. What they don't do is help around the house. Students in this country apparently have chores. So anyway, so that was another piece. They also did the sort of field audit that Senator Colbeck mentioned. They did what they called a video study, looking at classrooms. And in those studies, a significant finding of one of actually two significant findings of differences between this country and high-achieving countries was that in this country, our textbooks cover far more topics at every year than they do in high-achieving countries. And our textbooks match that because textbook companies had to satisfy 50 states. They just took everything from every state because they don't want to say, oh no, we did ours for California, but no, they don't really match Michigan's. So instead what teachers have is this mishmash of ideas that come and go and in many cases are not well focused. And so when Senator Caswell asked me how are they different, another piece that I would point to is that they are intended to be far more focused at a particular grade level so that teachers can go deep, can successfully reach every child in the classroom instead of this mile-wide and inch-deep approach that our textbooks and many of the school curriculums currently support.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you very much. Appreciate
You're very
your
welcome.
testimony. In the way of, I guess, alerting members and folks that are still here, we're scheduled till 5. There are a number of people who still wish to speak. And based on my calculation, we are going to have to adhere fairly close to the guidelines that Senator Pavlov outlined in the beginning as far as 3 to 5 minutes, and we are going to have to limit questions from legislators in order to get all these in and provide some time at the end for comments from legislators that would like to speak. So barring no opposition, I guess, to those guidelines, we'd like to get everybody in. Some people have driven a long ways to be here. So that's the way I'd like to continue. Ellie White is here, and she wishes to speak and opposes the bill. Is Ellie still here? Thank you, Ellie. And like I've said before, when you're comfortable, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Ellie White, and I am a sophomore in high school. And I would like to oppose Common Core because I believe the standards in America have already sunk from what they were in history. Many years ago, like 100 years ago, I would already be helping to support my family. And then when the mandatory attendance laws were passed, that was pushed back, so I have to attend school for a certain number of years. If we enact Common Core, that will be pushed back even farther so that the things we can do as a young person in the United States, I won't be allowed to do because I have to meet these standards. America was founded on principles of freedom, and I know there are certain things that have to be controlled, but education is not one of them. It is important for people to have an education, but we need freedom of education. If you just pass all these laws that take away freedom after freedom, it will be taking away from the reason that we founded America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your testimony. And I don't see any questions. Thank you so much for coming today. Scott Jenkins is still here, I believe, wish to testify in support of Common Core. Thank you, Scott. And while you're getting situated, I want to read a few cards of some folks that did not want to speak but oppose the bill. Drake Irvin opposes the Common Core. Kirk Irvin opposes Common Core and the resolution which was passed out of the House, along with Brooke Irvin. They're all from Lapeer and oppose the resolution. Give these to you. And Scott, welcome. I see you're comfortable. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator Walker. Members, my name is Scott Jenkins, and I'm here today as a private citizen. I live here in Michigan. A little bit about my background is I've moved to Michigan in 1997, have worked for the House Republican Caucus. I worked for Governor John Engler as his Ed Policy Director, went to the Bush administration and helped to implement No Child Left Behind. Was one of the original directors of CEPI. And so I thought I'd come and talk to you all today and just echo the support of someone who has been a long-time education reformer in the trenches of public policy in this state at the national level, and then most recently I was Governor Mitch Daniels' Ed Policy Director when we adopted the Common Core in Indiana, and I'd be glad to answer any questions regarding that. But suffice to say, I think we need to make sure that we clarify the distinction between what a standard is, what curriculum is, what assessments are, and what your conversation is today is about endorsing and moving forward with strong state standards that are Michigan-based, that the Michigan State Board of Education adopted. These are standards that have been adopted by other states. Regardless of the swirl around the standards and the support or non-support by the current administration and by other folks, one thing can be sure about these standards is that this is something that did not start 3 years ago. This is something that dates back all the way to A Nation at Risk, dates back to national education summits, where governors started asking, you know, we teach algebra in Mississippi, we teach algebra in Michigan. Shouldn't we be able to come together and find out what all makes up a competency in algebra? And 20 years later, we now have a set of standards in math and English language arts that states have adopted and can move forward on. The second issue is that this body and this state will have to make a determination after today, after whatever happens with this resolution, about what type of assessment you're going to administer to students. Because I know that this state has a long history of holding schools, school districts, students and parents and teachers accountable for student learning. Well, all of that begins with strong state standards. And so whatever assessment comes next is going to cost money, whether you build it on your own, whether you go with the Smarter Balanced assessment, whether you go with the Park assessment, or whether you go with another assessment. You're going to have to make that determination, and members of this administration and the State Board of Education and the Department of Education are going to come before you and ask for money one way or another. Either it's going to be a continuation of the money they spend now or not. But fundamentally, what I can tell you, as someone who's worked with people for 15 years, like Bill Schmidt and others at the Fordham Foundation, others that have supported these standards, that these are good standards to move forward for the state of Michigan. The other thing I can assure you, as a former director of CEPI, is that student data and student information that we collect in this state will change not one whit with the adoption of the Common Core standards. The protection of those standards will not change, or that data will not change one whit with the adoption by this body and by the legislature of the Common Core state standards. Secondly, what will not change is this state's long-standing commitment to protect and put a firewall up between what the state says public school students need to learn and be able to do and what students who are educated in their homes need to know and be able to do, because that is determined by their parents and their family. And there is a firewall that exists between them, and that this legislature has come forward on numerous occasions and has protected that firewall, and that will not change with the adoption of these standards. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. I know it's been a long day, and I'm sorry I had to jump out for a conference call, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about this.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any concise questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the difference between Smarter Balance and computer adaptive testing?
Well, computer adaptive testing, as you described earlier, is a type of assessment that is a more of a modern assessment in some cases that students take that adapts to how they answer it, so that you can learn actually where they're making an error in their either computational skills or other things. I am not an expert in Smarter Balanced and that assessment. That is not an assessment that I have worked on. What I can tell you is that Michigan does need to look at a more modernized assessment, because your point is very well taken earlier that you can't inform instruction 5 months after students take a summative assessment. You need a robust number of formative and summative assessments.
I'm going to cut you off. I was short. You got it too. Okay. Excuse me, but he's after me.
I got you.
What's to stop us from putting up a set of standards and calling up the feds and saying they're Common Core? Is somebody going to come down and check and say, well, you're doing this not quite the way we'd like it done, therefore we're not going to send you any money?
There are no Common Core police.
Okay, there are no police, so what are we doing here? Whatever our standards are, we just call up the feds and say we're with you and we're done. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. This nebulous thing out there that somebody developed is called Common Core. And nobody's going to check on whether we're doing it. In the meantime, this group that developed the Common Core, highly intelligent, dedicated people, will change Common Core every year because they'll be smarter than they are this year. So why don't we just call the feds and say we're with you and be done with it, and then get on with checking student performance? I kind of feel like we're sitting around and talking about the theory of phlogiston, and Priestley hasn't come along to tell us about oxidation. We're never going to be able to follow a Common Core that changes every time somebody does really valid research. Now, if you're telling me that the feds aren't going to call up and say, hey, we just found out something we didn't know last year, and now you got to change. Well, no, because we're not going to police the Common Core. Well, then what are we doing here? It's not directed to you, it's to my colleagues. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on here. And it's not very satisfying to find out that the anchor of this thing is a Common Core that will move over time. And nobody's going to care or check on it. And that's not directed to you, but to my colleagues. Thank you.
Senator, it may move over time, but you have a statewide elected constitutional body that sets what the standards are and adopts those standards. And they can modify and change those standards over time, as they have several times in the past 20 years. But the idea is that you set them and hold them long enough so that you can inform instructional practice and you can change what goes on in classrooms with assessment and other things.
Okay, I agree with you. The point is, the feds aren't going to care or check, apparently. The fact is, they'll be checking constantly.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Scott. And just minor point of information. I believe that, to the Senator, I believe that Smarter Balance is a type of computer adaptive testing, but we'll have to confirm that with the department. I believe that it is. Thank you very much, Scott.
Oh, can't leave yet.
Sorry.
Can I ask him a question, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Thank you. Welcome, Scott. I'm glad that you popped back in because you got a valuable insight into how this works. You talked about implementing this in Indiana, and now Indiana has paused on this. From being there, I know you can't really compare the two state boards and the governing bodies together in the legislative, but could you surmise that they've had to put a pause in on all their title money that's coming in until they adopt a new standard? What's happening in Indiana, these other states like Florida that have hit the pause button on this? Because we heard from the department at the beginning of this testimony that there's going to be a crisis in distributing the federal dollars that go along with having a state-adopted standard.
I wasn't here for what their description of what happens is. In Indiana, the body that's responsible for adopting state standards is a large body made up of both educators, unions, labor, business, and others, and they come together as an education roundtable to adopt standards. So you had a fairly broad vetting process in Indiana as it went forward. You had an election recently, and the current state superintendent wants to reevaluate and create and go through another standards setting process. As long as the state has standards in place, that's just one check mark for receipt of federal funds, Title I, or other types of programs. I think states would just have to make a determination of what they are going to consider their standards. And in Indiana, what they're operating under is the Common Core until they actually change their standards and adopt a new set of standards. You don't drop before you add, so to speak, with that regard.
So knowing Michigan, as of today, we are operating under the Common Core standards, correct?
You have adopted the Common Core standards.
So we have a standard. So the waiver that the department talked, and I know that you weren't here, I won't bring you into that conversation, but the department talked about the ability of losing their waiver and having to have 100% AYP immediately because we aren't funding the implementation of Common Core, yet we've already adopted it as a standard.
If they're taking that at the macro level, I think what they're doing is they're kind of modeling out what happens if this doesn't get resolved. And if this doesn't get resolved, then they'll have a hard time moving forward with all the accountability measures that are required under Michigan law and holding those title schools accountable and for even special ed services and those types of things if you don't have assessments in place moving forward. So if they're calculating this out, because you don't do these things, you can't just do full stop on this without some type of trajectory. And so they're trying to model out in their minds what it would take if the legislature decides that today we're not going to do Common Core, we're not going to do standards, we're not going to move forward on assessments. So we have to start from the jump right now on, okay, we have to start building standards, we're going to have to start pulling committees together, we're going to have to start looking at building our own assessments, we're going to have to look at putting out an RFP for an assessment based on new standards. So I think that's what they're giving you, is they're giving you a worst case scenario because they're trying to be honest about what they're facing.
Right. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it. We want to get to some of those. I got your number. I'll give you a call. Thanks.
Of this fellow? Scott? We have a quick question. Senator Caswell, I'm sorry.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for being here. You said, if I thought I heard you correctly, if we don't do the Common Core, we don't have standards. Don't we have standards in place already in the state?
You have, what's that?
Don't we have standards in place already in the state, not just for math and English language, but other things as well?
Yes, I believe you do.
So help me to understand, if we don't do Common Core, would we revert back to those standards? Or would that be valid for the feds?
Okay, so this kind of raises the question that Senator Papageorge raises. Do you all want to sit as the State Board of Education and adopt standards for the state? Right now, the State Board of Education, a constitutional body that has responsibility over supervision and of public education, has said these are the Michigan standards.
So
we are now in the process of going through a vetting process. So
it would be up to them to set another set of standards. They could go back to the old state standards, or they could be something else.
Or they could pick up, another state standards. Massachusetts, they've adopted the Common Core, or another state. I mean, there's 45 other states that have adopted the Common Core. So you got it.
Thank you, Scott. Next, we have Kate McAuliffe. Is Kate still here? I'll just let y'all know she supports Common Core. She's from Hillsdale, Representative Caswell. Sorry, we didn't get to Kate. Joan Klappenstein wishes to speak, and she opposes the resolution in Common Core. And Joan, welcome.
Thank you, each one of you. I am not an educator. I am a nurse of 50-some years. My husband and I have raised 2 daughters in the Michigan school system from kindergarten, for one through her medical degree. I oppose Common Core, and I just want to mention a few things here. Although I'm not an educator, I am a listener, I am a reader. I have been attending as many of these meetings as I possibly can. And therefore, I have before me here the Resolution 11 that was voted on last week by the House. And I would like to just make a few comments about this resolution, if I may please. I would like to go down to, let's see, it's the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th paragraph. It's one of the whereas. It says, adopting high educational expectations and ensuring that all of our students are receiving a high-quality education to develop independent thought and compete globally through a transparent and accountable system is paramount. That transparency has not filtered down to moms and grandmas like me. I have become more knowledgeable about Common Core, but I know many that know nothing about it. I'd like to just give you one example. My daughter, who is Michigan, she is a practicing physician, and part of the reason I think of her accomplishments not only has been because of the Michigan school system, but because her dad and I have been very, very active in their lives and their education. She has a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old in the Michigan elementary school. They had a curriculum meeting for parents 2 weeks ago, which she and her husband went to. She was in the 2nd grade classroom, and the teacher began to talk to them, and Common Core was brought up. My daughter asked, because she has some knowledge of Common Core, whether or not any of the parents in that classroom knew anything about Common Core. There was one dad that said he had heard of it. There wasn't another parent in the classroom that had heard anything about it. She asked a couple questions. The teacher was not prepared to answer any questions on Common Core, although it is the curriculum that my granddaughter is using in that particular elementary school. The teacher got so flustered that she went out and she found a school board member and asked her to come in. This school board member said that this classroom and curriculum night was not meant to discuss Common Core, and said that there were not to be any questions about it that night. And as a matter of fact, they went to my daughter and her husband after that session for that second grade class had been completed, and told her that, demanded of her, that she have a private meeting with the school board member, the principal, and the superintendent. They met. The first words out of their mouth was, "We are not here to discuss Common Core. We are here to discuss the fact that you caused a problem in the classroom by raising a subject that nobody was prepared to talk about." So much for her parental involvement in her daughter's and her son's class. So there is not, I would say to you, there is not this transparency that is talked about in this resolution that was passed last week. I would like to go on to the second page. It says here that the implementation of the Common Core state standards by the State Board of Education and the Michigan Department of Education is contingent on the ability of Michigan to add or remove standards that are in the best interest of the students of Michigan with no ramifications from the federal government. Now, how can we here in Michigan say that we're going to implement Common Core and fund it as long as we can promise that there will be no ramifications from the federal government? I don't know of anything that the federal government doesn't create problems with when they get involved, and they are very much involved in Common Core. Next, it says, the State Board of Education and the Michigan Department of Education may implement Common Core standards so long as such standards do not dictate curriculum. How is that going to be possible? How is it possible for standards not to dictate curriculum? It is folly to think that that is the case. I would like to jump down to one farther down on the page. It says that the State Board of Education and the Michigan Department of Education may implement Common Core standards so long as Michigan students and parents are assured of the safety and security of their personally identifiable student information. And it goes on in that paragraph to say that Michigan promises that no data, personal data that is collected through any kind of an assessment is not going to be shared with any non-education entity. That may be technically true. However, if we go with state balance or PARCC, those assessments are not owned by Michigan, and we are not going to have any control over what happens to that information that is collected on our children and who it will be shared with. And I guess I am just skeptical enough of the federal government after listening to all the IRA business that we've been going through recently to think that there can be some pretty rough consequences of personal data that can be collected. And last of all here, it says that the word cost, the one and only time the word is used in this whole resolution that was passed, is on this second page. And it says by December 1st, the State Board of Education and the Michigan Department of Education shall issue a full report on the let's see, I lost my place here. On the core standards, the assessment tools that are to be used, and the implementation costs for local school districts and the state of Michigan. We did not get a very clear answer about costs from the state people that were here talking about that, but I have here in my hand a paper that has been put out by the Pioneer Institute, and it was written by Henry W. Burke. It was revised August 29th of 13, that breaks down the categories that the categories for implementation of Common Core, and they are for testing, for professional development, for textbooks, and technology. And it has all been broken down, all the columns, all the dollar signs, and it says that Michigan, it is going to cost Michigan at least $550 million to implement Common Core. My goodness, ladies and gentlemen, with expanded Medicaid, with the cost of this, do we not have some responsibility to be fiscally responsible during these desperate times? And so I would ask if anybody wants a copy of that or would like to know where I got that from, I will be glad to give it to you. And last of all, I was here for the joint meeting on what was this, on teacher evaluations. Somebody brought up teacher evaluations a little bit ago. And Dr. Deborah Ball, who was the Dean of Education at the University of Michigan, gave an outstanding report on how they are trying to improve and develop teacher assessment. But the one thing that she said is that if you have a child that has a subject and a poor teacher for 1 year, that child can recover from that. But Dr. Ball said if that is followed by a second year, say, of math teaching, that child will never recover from the poor teaching. Now, parental involvement is critical to keep kids on going in the right direction. Parents are excluded from this.
Joan, do you have a kind of a quick summary so that we
Yes.
get to your point?
Please consider not funding Common Core. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. Senator Colbeck.
Yes, this is quick.
If you're willing to take questions.
Oh.
No, actually, this isn't a quiz. It's actually,
this is your closing statement?
She's the first person that brought up the concept of the resolution, and I just want to, it's a
Okay.
question actually, and for anybody who can affirmatively or negatively answer the following assertion that the HCR resolution, the stipulations in that resolution are non-binding. Is that correct?
I don't know. I haven't studied it yet. We're taking testimony.
On the resolution, though.
On Common Core, so I haven't studied the resolution that closely yet.
Yeah, and the resolution isn't before this committee.
Right.
Okay.
We appreciate your testimony. We have 7 more cards to get to, and we have about 25 minutes to move through that. So I'm going to call up Brian Cloud, representing Steelcase, wishing to speak and in support of the bill. And as Brian is coming up, I just want to say that next up will be Donna Tinberg and Abby Allen when Brian has completed his testimony. Welcome, Brian.
Afternoon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Brian Cloyd. I'm Vice President of Global Corporate Relations at Steelcase, the global leader of office furniture and work environment industry. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss what I believe is the most important issue facing our state, which is providing a quality education to our young people that will prepare them for the best futures. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Chose to go to college at University of Detroit Mercy, for both undergraduate and graduate degrees. I've spent my entire professional career in Michigan working in either human resources or corporate relations. During my career, I've had the extensive involvement in education, including Michigan Business Leaders for Excellence in Education, Grand Rapids Education Reform Initiative, Advisory Board for the Business School at Grand Valley State University, the Advisory Board for University of Detroit Mercy College of Arts and Education, member of the Cherry Commission on Education and Economic Development, member and former board chair of Northern Michigan University, board member, University of Detroit Mercy, co-founder and past board chair of West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology, co-founder and board chair of Grand Rapids University Prep Academy, and Steelcase policy representative for the Business Roundtable Education and Workforce Development Committee. On behalf of the business leaders of Michigan, I want to underscore the impact on the state's economy by having so many unfilled jobs due to the lack of properly educated and trained workforce. At Steelcase, we employ 12,000 people worldwide. 3,000 of them are located here in the state of Michigan. Our company needs both skilled operations workers and high-skilled knowledge workers. And I would like you to understand how difficult it has been for us to fill jobs at all skill levels at our company in recent years. The war on talent is extremely difficult. We compete with major global companies for an increasingly limited pool of talented and skilled professionals. We recruit knowledge workers, engineers, designers, researchers, IT professionals, finance, etc., on a national level, whether experienced or new graduates. Michigan is not and can't be the only area where we search for top talent. We often hire foreign nationals to fill technical positions. As a global company, we search across our worldwide footprint for talent in those geographic locations, and we often hire those foreign nationals, including expats, from within the Steelcase network to fill key positions requiring technical knowledge. Based on projected retirements within the company, the gap between the skills we have and the skills we need will continue to widen. That's why continued implementation of the Common Core state standards is so important to Steelcase and Michigan. We need for knowledge workers who possess strong skills in critical thinking, design thinking, math, science, and reading, writing comprehension is increasing at a faster rate than even the growth of technology. We see the differences between our domestic workers and our global workers on a regular basis. In addition to my responsibilities at Steelcase, I'm personally concerned about the widening academic achievement gap between white students and those of color here in Michigan. But, lest you think this is just a racial issue, the achievement gap for both rural and urban students, racial or not, in Michigan is wider than in most states, and there's no question we need to make a significant improvements in our public education system in order to provide real opportunities for all of our citizens. Implementing Common Core will require grade level expectations to be equally as rigorous for all children in the state, from Benton Harbor to Bloomfield Hills. Higher standards also require accountability. Michigan must replace the antiquated paper and pencil MEP tests that have been in use for decades and utilize computer adaptive testing that aligns the Common Core and represents the next generation of student assessments. The right testing and assessment tools will not only provide real-time information that can inform classroom instruction, these tests measure both proficiency and individual student growth. For me, nothing is more important than preparing our young people for the challenges of tomorrow. As a global organization, we see the world not only getting flatter, but the education competitiveness is outpacing us. I urge the State Senate to stay the course and continue implementing the Common Core state standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate your insight. Are there any questions for Brian? Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Seeing none, Monica Biddle, representing herself from Frankenmuth. Oh, never mind, doesn't wish to speak. Are you Monica? Oh, Monica's not here, not wish to speak. Dr. Irene Norde, Michigan Council of Teachers of Mathematics from Detroit. Yes, wishing to speak, supports the bill. Has asked for 10 to 15 minutes, but a couple will be all.
I'll cut it short.
Thank you. I understand you were here for the first committee meeting. Thank you for sitting through that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to this committee. My name is Dr. Irene Norde. I'm the president of the Michigan Council of Teachers of Mathematics. I'm also the executive director for Detroit Public Schools Office of Mathematics. I have 34 years as an educator. The Michigan Council of Teachers of Mathematics, in which I'll lovingly refer to as MCTM, is the professional organization for Michigan mathematics educators, pre-kindergarten through college. As an advocate for excellence in mathematics education for all children, our members also include interested community members, pre-service mathematics teachers, and retired educators. MCTM has a board of directors that represents geographical regions throughout the Great Lakes state. If you look at my packet, my testimony has been provided for you. It's on page 3. And so you can see that we have 14 regions that includes all parts of the state. MCTM provides public voice and leadership to support and advance high-quality teaching and learning of mathematics. Michigan educators support the Common Core. My discussion today will be focused on the Common Core, textbook advantages, and online assessment readiness in Michigan and Detroit. First, MCTM voiced concerns regarding the Common Core State Standards Initiative early on and requested time to review and conduct side-by-side comparisons between the Michigan and the Common Core standards. Why? Because Michigan educators wanted to examine the alignment within and across grades and courses. We warned about being too hasty to adopt without being thorough. I am glad to report we were given the opportunity to assist in the development of the crosswalk documents that were provided for Michigan educators, consisting of the alignment between the Michigan and the Common Core standards. Then and only then, we could say without hesitation we support. Later, we published a position paper entitled MCTM Supports Common Core and High Quality Curriculum. You can see the attachment. It's the last 2 pages in this packet. These are minimum standards. You can always do more. Textbook advantages of Common Core. As a curriculum developer, we have always had to develop curriculum using books written to address the state standards for Texas, Florida, and California. There are 20 states known as textbook adoption states, in which Texas, Florida, and California play a significant role. Textbook adoption states choose at the state level what textbooks can be used by all districts. These are the states that have the leverage to dictate what goes in books. For the first time being a part of something larger, these states will no longer set the standards for what is taught and learned in the books that Michigan uses. This is a direct result of being a part of 45 states, the District of Columbia, and 4 territories who have adopted the Common Core. I'm going to jump down. Administration of online testing in Detroit Public Schools. Under the leadership of significant others, administered online testing for last school year. Detroit Public Schools consist of a portfolio of schools, and Detroit has adopted the Common Core standards and has already experienced gains in achievement measured by the MEEP, the MME, and results from the district's online common assessments. The district online common assessments are based on grade-specific outcomes aligned to the Common Core administered in grades kindergarten through grade 12. It's also an adapted assessment. We understand the added value of measuring academic progress. The district started implementation last year. I'm going to jump down because of time. Michigan districts have been providing online options for students. This is why classroom teachers have shared with us, as well as with you, that they are ready to move forward. We are currently, throughout the Great Lakes state, have blended learning environments that already have computers, netbooks, iPads, and other technology as an integral part of teaching, learning, and assessment. Michigan schools have been engaged in assessing student learning on computers, netbooks, and iPads. And then I'm going to jump to an early look at Smarter Balance Assessment. Available nearly 2 years before the assessment system is implemented in 2014-15, the Smarter Balance practice tests allow teachers, students, parents, and other interested parties to experience the features of online testing and gain insight into how Smarter Balance will assess students' mastery of the Common Core. Michigan schools and districts have had the opportunity to also pilot the new assessment. Sample items have been made available through their website. The Smarter Balance practice tests provide an early look at sets of assessment questions aligned to the Common Core for grades 3 through 8 and 11 in both English language arts, literacy, and mathematics. The release of the practice tests follows the Smarter Balance pilot test, the first large-scale tryout of items and performance tasks conducted February through May 2013. Michigan educators are ready, and your largest district stands ready too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
in
much.
Support.
Appreciate your testimony, and thank you for waiting till you had a chance.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have Deborah DeBacher, wishes to speak and opposes Common Core. Welcome. Floor is yours, Deborah.
My name is Deborah DeBacher. I'm from Troy. I'm with Stop Common Core in Michigan. And I can answer probably all the questions that you've had from the other testifiers, but I really think it would be fair on our side for you to take a look at the YouTubes that are available on, you can go to Stop Common Core in Michigan to the link of all the experts we brought in for the House in opposition to Common Core for you to get all your answers. There you'll find where it's not internationally benchmarked. Professor Zerman will testify against Professor Smith's benchmarking. He also found if you had looked at Common Core website for a while, they had changed the words to internationally informed. Now they changed them back to internationally benchmarked. They were getting caught in their wording. It is curriculum. We're buying Common Core books. We're having all kinds of bond issues all over for technology because of the need for the extreme technology, extreme bandwidth, all those things for the Common Core year-end testing. It's college and career ready. Define that. Jason Zimba, one of the main 5 writers of Common Core, in a testimony in Massachusetts, said that it's really community college ready because Common Core doesn't really go, has algebra to it, but not an extensive amount. Curriculum, you have Appendix B of Common Core has book lists, so we're talking about curriculum. And also to answer your No Child Left Behind question, Senator Papageorge, we have Texas, Virginia, Nebraska, and in math in Minnesota, they never adopted Common Core, and they seem to be getting their No Child Left Behind not hurt by it. I believe Texas's application is still in limbo, but they haven't been hurt. They've gotten all their grant money. They're okay. So I think we'll be okay too. And I do want to say that all the people, the groups that have come here and testified, they are Gates funding recipients, and you've been listening to them for a long time. Prior to '94, our state had no core curriculum, and we were doing fine. And has things gotten better as you're listening to these same old people? No, we've fallen behind in our country. We need to let experiment and be free. Let our districts and our teachers experiment. I have written testimony before you. First, this is about Florida that we all know. They have left PARCC testing, and they are going to create their own standards. SMARTER is a federally funded, federally appointed validation committee testing. When the federal government pays for something, there are always strings attached. And whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, at some point you don't like the strings. For example, in order to get the Race to the Top application, the Obama administration demanded we increase charter schools, something Democrats don't usually like. And so there's always a problem. SMARTER is a consortium that Michigan State Board of Ed and Governor Granholm contracted to write Michigan tests in 2010. It's a 26-state member, federally funded consortium with a federal validation team who will review SMARTER tests for, quote, item design and validation. And attached to your testimony, I have periodicals reporting this and the actual webpage from the Federal Department of Ed where it explains the Oversight Committee. So right now, though, there are no governance rules to tell us how a state can challenge a question, change a question, or eliminate a question on the test. No policies have been made public. SMARTER has a contract with Michigan to not only write the year-end testing, which will be like MEEP for your answer, Senator Papageorge, but interim or formative tests that I think will be more like the adaptive testing. Teachers will have to teach exactly with exact timing what is tested on those SMARTER. For example, someone here said they don't have to be on the same page on the same day, but yes, they do if every quarter their kids have to take this SMARTER test. The reasons that, these are the reasons probably why 6 states have withdrawn from their testing: Alabama, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Oklahoma, and Florida. Utah, Texas, and Nebraska never signed on to the testing. So if we withdraw, we're going to be in some good company. Below, I also have a letter here in your written testimony from the Georgia State Superintendent, John Barge, to his district superintendents in his reasons of pulling out: cost, ability to change standards, local districts' technology not there yet, and student time on testing. So what he says, finally and arguably, the most important consideration adopting the PARCC assessment would limit the ability of Georgia educators to make adjustments or changes to our standards. If Georgia educators determine that certain standards need to be shifted or revised, we would run the risk of no longer being aligned with the PARCC assessment. Such misalignment would put our students at a disadvantage, which would be the same with SMARTER. If we find something that's better, our children will be at a disadvantage. So I ask you again, please take our kids, get rid of this SMARTER testing. Then we can use Common Core, the parts we think are good. We can go back to our old standards, work from there. Don't change, make a rotation. Every 6 years maybe change the standards. Don't stress the teachers out with constantly changing them. I know it's not quite your job, but that's what the state board should do. We can build our own tests here using the examples of Texas, for example, who are developing knowledge and fact-based tests. New York, as Senator Colbeck has said, has had a huge political fallout from this testing. I have attached you in Newsday reports of 1,500 parents, teachers, and students rallied at the high school football field in Long Island to criticize it because the kids went from 75% passing rate to 37% passing rate. There's something wrong with these tests. I don't think that these kids could have gone that far down in that short of a year.
Deborah?
So I appreciate that.
Well,
Thank you.
I don't want to cut you off. I just wonder if there's a summary, and you have gone past the 8 minutes that you...
I'm sorry.
requested. But that's okay.
I couldn't hear you.
That's okay.
Did you have a summary of? I'm sorry, couldn't hear your question.
I was wondering if you had a summary to wrap up your statement.
No, that's it. Just please get us out of the smarter tests, and then we'll be free to use Common Core or any other good education policy that we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have, well, let me just say, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more folks that would like to speak. And so I'm just going to try to get in as many as we can, and I'm willing to go over the 5 o'clock slotted time. I don't know about the other members. I guess we'll play it by ear. But Donna Tinberg and Abby Allen, you two are here. And welcome. You guys can make yourself comfortable, and the floor is yours.
I'm Donna Tinberg, and this is Abby Allen, and we're here representing MACE, which is the Michigan Association of Administrators of Special Education. I think that's a voice you haven't heard in the room yet today. MACE is an organization of about 650 members. We're affiliated with the National Council for Exceptional Children and the National Council of Administrators of Special Education. Our mission is to provide leadership for the development and implementation of quality programs and services for students with disabilities within the total education community. And it's to that purpose that we are here today to support the Common Core state standards and associated assessments for Michigan's public school students, in particular students with disabilities. MACE believes that the Common Core standards will provide access to rigorous academic content standards for all students, including students with disabilities. Further, we believe that this will provide students with disabilities the challenge they need to excel within the general ed curriculum, earn a high school diploma, and be prepared to succeed in their post-secondary careers, including college and career readiness. It also provides an opportunity for students to create their own understandings and knowledge through dialogue, hands-on learning, and real-life experiences. These are all meaning-making methodologies that work well for students who learn differently and students who struggle. We also know that the Common Core standards are a set of standards, not a curriculum. And as a set of standards, they promote local control of instruction and formative assessment, both of which can be adapted as necessary for students with disabilities in the classroom. We also know that because the Common Core state standards, because they are shared among states, will result in a larger pool of expertise that Michigan educators can access to impact and improve academic and functional outcomes for students with disabilities. Therefore, we urge the legislature to take affirmative action to support funding for the Common Core standards, which have already been adopted by our state board, so that we can move forward for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming and waiting during this long
Appreciate
committee.
you all waiting.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And Mary Timmer is here. Well, I'm sorry, and does not wish to speak, but opposes the Common Core standards. And read that into the record. And Melissa Risk is here and wishes to speak in support of Common Core standards. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for listening to my testimony. My name is Melissa Rixey, married into a Dutch family, and I have been teaching mathematics at Clarkston High School for 9 years. I've been involved with implementing the Common Core state standards for mathematics in district, county, and statewide efforts since 2009. To give you a little background about me, prior to teaching, I was a management consultant at Deloitte for 6 years, consulting with various Fortune 100 companies both in the U.S. and overseas. In this role, I noticed that the men and women who were most successful could communicate effectively, reason clearly, and problem solve, all while using the tools available to them. When I received the Common Core state standards for mathematics, I literally jumped for joy when I read the standards for mathematical practice. I noted that these processes were not taught regularly in Michigan classrooms, in part because past standards and assessments in Michigan have not emphasized and assessed these critical skills. These standards give me hope that all mathematics teachers would begin emphasizing not only the critical mathematical concepts and procedures, but also the process skills so important for succeeding in the world after formal education, particularly in STEM careers. As a teacher, I've been fortunate to lead and participate in groups of Oakland County teachers and administrators who have examined the standards, piloted and reviewed instructional materials that embody the new standards in our classroom, and helped each other understand how we might effectively implement these new standards. We have delved deeply into these learning trajectories that you've heard about evident in the standards so that we can more tightly coordinate the development of those critical mathematical concepts through the grades and better meet the diverse needs of our students. With the standards, we still get final say in our district, as you know, but we now have networks of teachers throughout the nation with which to confer, share resources, and learn about best instructional practices for each concept. Because I think it's hard, you know, having not been always an educator, I didn't really understand the difference between a standard and the way you teach. You have so many options available to you, but you have to pick the one that's not only best for the concept, but also best for your kids. And that's the art of teaching. But it's hard to find the science, like was mentioned earlier, if you don't have access to it. By joining in with a national coalition, we have access to not only the experts, but all the other people who are doing the same thing we're doing. And there's power in numbers, and there are excellent standards. So let me just skip to an example from my own classroom. So in my Introduction to Statistics course, students are now asked to explain what they mean when they answer a question using a reasoning framework that we are adopting in our mathematics classes. This concept of supporting your claims with evidence and reasoning is taken directly from the standards for ELA, for English Language Arts. Because of this approach, all my students have developed or fine-tuned strong reasoning skills from the implementation of this concept in the space of a 3-month course. A few years ago, if I asked a student to tell me more, or what makes you say that, I would hear silence, or something to the effect of, that's just the answer, or I don't know how to explain it, I just know how to do it. Now I ask those same questions, and in return get sentences and sometimes paragraphs of well-phrased, succinct explanations with strong evidence. In conclusion, I have both a professional and a personal interest in how the standards are implemented and how that implementation will affect my students and my own 2 children. I believe that the Common Core provides educators with the framework and mechanisms to teach children important concepts and lifelong skills in a way that is still local, all with the support of a national coalition of educators, researchers, mathematicians, and industry leaders. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Appreciate you coming here to testify. Sandra Kahn, hopefully you're still here. She's left. Sandra Kahn wanted to testify. She opposes the Smarter Balance and supports the resolution. And we'll read that into the record. Tim Soughton, are you still here? Tim, you can introduce yourself and who you're with. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Chairman Walker, Chairman Pavlo. Tim Soughton with Business Leaders for Michigan. You have already heard today from Brian Cloyd, who is with Steelcase. Steelcase CEO Jim Hackett is a member of ours. I've submitted written testimony from our President and Chief Executive Officer, Doug Rothwell. So, I think Brian covered the reasons why we support the Common Core pretty well. I'm not going to regurgitate line for line the written testimony. Just wanted to let you know that we support it, and respectfully urge you to support it as well and move forward with implementing it in Michigan. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Let's see. Tim, you were quick.
I'm trying to be helpful.
You're being very sensitive to the committee's time. I appreciate that. I guess we have a few more cards. Thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate
Thank
you being here.
Thank you.
Yep. Karen Braun. You thought we forgot you.
No, you wouldn't do that, would you?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Welcome.
I'm practicing for a marathon. I'm going to run it in 3 weeks. This was my endurance training today.
Thank you.
Before I get to what I wanted to say, I believe it was Senator Emmons, maybe 3.5 hours ago, asked if this was going to lead to a European-style model. The answer to that is yes. And I'll quote Arnie Duncan, I'll give you the long version of that answer, who said, "I want to be able to track every child throughout their educational trajectory so that we know what they are doing. Secondly, I want to track children back to their teachers so we know the impact the teachers are having on these children. And third, I want to be able to track these students back to the teachers and teachers back to the schools of education so we can understand which schools of education and which feeder schools are producing the teachers that are producing the students and the students which had the most gain." That's a European-style educational system. Governor Snyder, I'll quote him, who said that it's time we stop thinking about education as K through 12, but P to 20. P is prenatal. 20 are the 4 years post-college. That's prenatal to lifelong learning, is what he quoted it as. That's the European-style education system. Arnie Duncan also said in 2010, tracking student progress from birth through college. That's the European-style educational system. And to Senator Papageorge, I've asked myself more times than I can count, why am I here? What are we here for? I'm a homeschool mom. I have 6 children. 4 of them now graduated. And I think to myself, why do I sit in education committee hearings? I should be able to educate my children freely. But that's what we're here for, because education is no longer local. You know it, and I know it. Because if education were local, none of us would be sitting here right now. But we are. I find myself in the uncomfortable position of sitting before you, soliciting hoping that you will reject national standards. Education is not local, or we wouldn't be sitting here, sir. That's the bottom line. And what I wanted to say is in regards to the whole idea of this resolution and the Common Core. This resolution recognizes that the federal government has no constitutional authority to dictate how children in the state of Michigan are educated. Recognizing that fact alone should cause every senator to reject this resolution, to reject Common Core, and revoke our participation in the Smarter Balanced Assessments. It's as simple as that. The feds are involved. This resolution found that there's no constitutional authority for the feds to be involved. What's the debate about? Really, why are we here? But don't take my word that the feds are involved. President Obama said in 2013 in his State of the Union that he, quote, convinced almost every state to develop smarter curricula and higher standards. Time out. Didn't we just hear that these are just standards and not curricula? So is President Obama a liar? Anybody here want to allege that? No comment. Okay, so President Obama is either lying or the feds are dictating how children in Michigan are being educated if we continue with the Common Core. So what are we doing here? Why the debate? There is no debate. The federal government is involved, and it is standards and curricula. There's no debate about it. David Coleman, the lead architect for the Common Core, said, if you put something on a test, you are required that the children practice it 100 times. That's curricula. If the lead architect is telling the teachers that they have to have their kids practice it 100 times, that's curricula. He is only supporting exactly what Obama said he paid the states to do, develop curricula. Everybody knows that what is tested is what is taught. Let's not be so foolish as to pretend that by joining Smarter Balanced with these 24 other states that we will retain control of our standards, our testing, or our curricula. We won't. We traded complete control by joining SBAC for 1 vote. If you wanted to go to that meeting, you would have to have flown out to California for the last SBAC assessment meeting. What parent? What legislator wants to take their week's vacation to fly out to SBAC because they want to discuss what's on the national assessment that our kids are going to be taking? That's ridiculous. What are we here for? Because I want to stop that. Why don't you? What is the problem here? The problem is nobody wants to call the elephant in the room the elephant in the room. These are national standards dictated by the federal government, admitted to it by Obama, that this is standards and curriculum. This is a national education system, and what am I doing here? I want to stop it, because as a parent, as a mom of 6 children, I don't want national education standards. I want local control, local assessments, and parents and teachers doing what is best for their kids, not the federal government. And in closing, I just want to say that I had the privilege of being invited to Governor Snyder's town hall. So the allegation that the federal government is involved isn't something that I'm just frustrated about. Governor Snyder said to me directly, and Senator Colbeck was there in the room, he said that the federal government is highly involved, and that can be challenging at times. Challenging at times? I submit to you that when the federal government is involved, they are acting unconstitutionally. It's not a challenge to look at your federal government and tell them you are acting unconstitutionally. What it is, it's hard to do because money controls everything. And you don't want to look the face of the federal government in the eye and tell them, we don't want your money. That's the bottom line here. Every one of you here knows the truth. You know that the federal government is dictating this, and you know that we have received the money, but you don't want to look the elephant in the eye and say, no, we don't want the money. That's the bottom line. I submit to you, what am I doing here? That's what I ask myself when I'm running this marathon. Why am I at mile 16 right now? What am I doing here? Because I care. I care about what is happening in education. I care about what my kid's future is going to be. I had my first grade grandson this month. And proud to say, my son wants to home educate his little guy. And I'm prouder than heck of that fact because I home educated my 6 children. But under Common Core with national standards, that won't be the case. They won't be allowed to. And I can get into the details of that if you'd like, but I've had personal experience with how the federal government, through the Marine Corps, denied my son's diploma here in the state of Michigan and said that his homeschool diploma, it wasn't valid because he was homeschooled. Even though I followed every one of the requirements that you set out for me, I was told by the federal government that my diploma was not valid simply because he was homeschooled. That ought to make the hair on the back of your head stand still and stand straight up. The federal government tried to tell me my homeschool diploma wasn't valid. I stood up to them and I said, the heck with you. My son deserves to get in the Marine Corps because that's the right thing. And that's what he did. He got in, thankfully. But some parents, some homeschool parents, were not so fortunate, and they lost that obligation that their son wanted to have because simply they were homeschooled. I submit to you that when the federal government gets involved, they seek to control. You either stand up to them now and do it boldly, or you just, you know what, go find yourselves another job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your compelling testimony, and also thank your son for his service, too.
I have 2 sons in the Marine Corps.
Thank both of them.
You're welcome.
Okay, I appreciate it. I believe that concludes testimony from all those who have submitted cards on this issue of the Common Core standards. And we do have a fair amount of senators, at least with regards to the Appropriations Subcommittee. If any of the senators would like to make a brief statement and get that in the record with regards to this issue, we go ahead and take testimony.
What struck me as I listened to the testimony was those who were output-oriented generally had problems with the Common Core. And output-oriented, I mean evidence-based. I mean people who said they were in the medical profession, for example. There was a tendency of those who were not out of that ilk to support Common Core. They were input-oriented. Now, we're all trapped by our past lives. My son had to suffer, like many of you on this panel, through new math. You remember that one? It was nutty. My grandson in the 2nd grade was unfortunate enough to have a teacher who didn't believe in phonics. And she said, don't worry about spelling. If you don't know the word, make it up and keep going. It took years for him to catch up with his classmates. That was all input stuff from really sincere, dedicated people. And so when I hear that the best and the brightest have decided the following input ought to be made into our educational system, it gives me pause. And I just let you folks know, be very careful about really intelligent, dedicated people that don't come to you with evidence. And I thank you for my closing minute here.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate those comments and also your attention during the committee. See no other requests. Senator Pavlov, anybody on your side want to make
Senator Colbeck?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate that we had a lot of the discussion on both sides of the fence, and I think you guys balanced the testimonies very well, and I appreciate that. One of the most compelling takeaways that I have coming out of this session, I'm still fixated on the mantra that these are indeed higher standards, and what I've got out of this assessment, and I've read the TIMSS assessment, I've read the follow-up from Professor Schmidt, is essentially that we need to adopt the standards before we can find out whether or not they improve our performance or not. And that's one heck of an experiment. And it sounds eerily like another statement that I heard a famous Speaker of the House make at the federal level, which is you got to pass the bill before you can find out what's in it. And that didn't turn out so hot either. So I'm a little concerned about this, but I appreciate the fact that we got all this out in the open here and we had a chance to discuss it in Ed policy. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Senator Emmons? No. Seeing no further business before the Senate Education Committee, we are adjourned.
Subcommittee on K-12 and Department of Ed is now adjourned.